Welcome to the Sword and Trowel, a podcast of Founders Ministries. Founders exist for the recovery of the gospel and the reformation of local churches. And we're delighted to be coming to you again from Cape Coral, Florida. And I'm here today with my good friend Joel Beeke, all the way from Grand Rapids, Michigan. So Joel, welcome to the Sword and the Trowel.
Great to be with you, Tom.
Delighted to have you down here and for you to give a few minutes of your time to come and be a part of the Sword and the Trowel podcast. We do these podcasts weekly, and people tune in to just hear different things that are on our hearts and minds. We try to produce content that's beneficial. And one of the things that you and I talked about a while back that is just stuck in my mind is the various ministries that you're involved in, but the one ministry in particular of Reformation Heritage Books. And to hear your passion about that and then to learn the backstory of how it got started, it's just captivated my thoughts, and I wanted other people to hear it as well. But before we get into that, you are a pastor of the Heritage Netherlands congregation in Grand Rapids, right?
Heritage Reformed.
Heritage Reformed. And you've been doing that 36 years?
Yes.
Almost, right? Yep. Something like that. And then you founded the Puritan Reformed Theological Seminary, correct?
With my denomination. Yep.
Okay, so you've been first president and you're still a professor there. You have published over 100 books. Do you know how many books you've written and edited?
Writing is over 100, and then editing is well over 100 as well. I love books.
Okay, yeah. So that love of books led you to begin what became the Heritage Reformation Publications or Press, right? So tell us about that. I'm just intrigued by that. I mean, because that started when you were just a teenager, right?
Right. Well, what happened was I came under just incredibly deep, profound conviction of sin when I was 14 years old and couldn't find the gospel. And I raided my dad's bookcase, and my dad said that I could write in all the books, which I did. I marked them up. I read every night. I read through the whole Bible a couple times that year, but just couldn't find peace. And I read through his Puritan books in his bookcase, all those old Banner Truth paperbacks. I read through them all, marked them up, and God used them and a new pastor who was coming to town to really lead me to liberty in Christ. And I had this overwhelming experience one night where God set me free. But a lot of it in the background that led up to it was reading the Puritan books. The Puritans gave me so much comfort, so much insight. They spoke so to my soul. And when I was set free that night, even though I didn't know the terms yet, active and passive obedience of Christ, I saw very clearly Christ's double obedience and how it was imputed to me and how he became my righteousness. And I felt just exactly like Christian in Pilgrim's Progress. The burden rolled off my back into the empty sepulcher. I was overwhelmed with joy, and I came down at 3:30 in the morning. I couldn't sleep. I just kept weeping. I got my dad out of bed and told him, I'm saved. My sins are forgiven. And he wanted to know how, of course. And so I told him everything. But then it was a few months after that I felt that these books had been so helpful for me that I needed to spread them to others. And so our church did not have at that time a church library. So I went to the elders and I asked them if I could start a church library. And they kind of discouraged me, but they wouldn't refuse it, but they said 3 elders have to approve every single book that would be put in the library. So I said, okay. So I made a list of 100 books, and they approved 8. And I started a library with 8 books with 3 card catalogs, subject, title, my author. And I made a really big deal of it. It was very, very important to me. And then by the time a few people started reading a few of those books, the one elder who was dragging his feet approving them, I pestered him. And he ended up accepting all 100. So they didn't have a separate fund for it. So I actually took my life savings, believe it or not, which was about $600, and I just drew it all out of the bank. I bought all 100 myself, and I put them on my pastor's front doorstep and rang the doorbell and walked away. It's kind of crazy, like he wouldn't figure out who was doing it. But anyway, so he said, yes, you can put all these now in the library, which I did. And then people started reading them, and quite a few people actually. And a few people got converted by them. It just moved me to tears. And this is going to sound terribly mystical and strange, but I'll tell you just what happened. I had a dream one night. And when I woke up from the dream, I just realized what I dreamt, that I saw a piece of paper with a return address that said Bible Truth Books, and then it said Alexander, Archibald, Thoughts on Religious Experience, retail price $12, our price $9. And when I woke up, I said, I've got to take this beyond the church. I've got to take it out into society and to other churches, and we've got to sell these good old Puritan books and so on. And so I went to the consistory again. I asked them if I could start a book company called Bible Truth Books, nonprofit, and if I could sell them, like 30% discount or so. And they said, well, there's a man in Grand Rapids who owns a business who's selling books, and we don't want you to compete with him, so you have to get permission from him first. If you get permission from him and the elders approve all the books you carry, you can. I said, thank you very much. I took my brother up with me to Grand Rapids, just a 50-minute ride, and we got out in front of the guy's house, and I had no idea if this man was 30 years old or 90 years old. Well, it proved to be he was like 85, and he had long, snowy white hair, and we walked in, and he didn't understand why we were coming. We explained it all, and finally he got the message, and he said, you mean you boys want to start a book company? You want to sell the old biblical Reformed Puritan books? Like, yes, sir, I said, to the whole world. He said, the whole world is yours. He threw out his hands, and we looked at each other. We had just been in front of his house crying and weeping that he would say yes, thinking he'd say no. Yeah. And the answer was just so overwhelming. We went back out in the car, and we just thanked the Lord, and we were both weeping. We have permission to do this. And so the first book list was one sheet of paper on both sides, about 12 books. Anyway, it was Post Office Box 2373, Kalamazoo, Michigan, Bible Truth Books. I would go to the post office every day and pray at the curbside that there be at least one order. I was thankful for every order. And that's how we began. And by the time I was accepted for the ministry in the denomination I was in, when I was 21, so I started it when I was 16. In those 5 years, it built up to maybe $75,000 to $100,000 of sales a year. So not really very much, but it was substantive. And every Saturday night, we would get all the young people of the church together and fill the orders. So I had free labor. And then when I was 21 years old, I turned it over to my brother. He turned it over to somebody else. And actually, Bible Truth Books is still going today. But then when I was 25 and I was ordained, I was made president of the denomination's book ministry, because they saw my love for books. And that was selling about $10,000 a year. And I put my whole heart into that. And then we had this very unfortunate, sad split in the denomination, and they kept all the books. That was when I was, that was in 1993. So by that time I was about 40 years old. I had built it up to well over $100,000 of sales per year. But then I felt I had to start all over. But this time I said, well, I'm not going to tie it again to a denomination. Never know what will happen. I'm going to have an independent board, interdenominational board, just of people who love solid Reformed experiential literature. And so then I began what was called Reformation Heritage Books. And, that we started completely from scratch. And so that's been going almost 30 years now, 20, 28, 29 years. And now it's become an organization with, millions of dollars of sales every year. And it's just wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I love it.
Yeah.
And I still approve every book that we carry. We carry 7,700 titles now. We do 40 of our own publications. So we carry books from about 70 different publishers. And we cherry pick each publisher, what we think is the really good Reformed Puritan type stuff that will really benefit God's people, and a lot of evangelistic books, a lot of books for children, specialize in books for children. And now we have, 20 some employees, I would say. And it's just, we bought a building of 44,000 square feet last year, and by the grace of God, God's people came forward. Because we're nonprofit, we really never have money to buy a building, but they paid for the whole building. And now we have commitments to do a lot of publications. Now everything is worked on a very professional level. We have scheduling up years ahead of time for books, and we have meetings once a month. We usually get between 20 to 30, sometimes 40 manuscripts per month from people around the world. So more than one a day. Oh. It's just a very, very busy ministry now. And so I have become chairman of the board now, and David Woolen's become the CEO, and things are ramping up under his expansion efforts. He's very visionary, and we're really excited about the future of RHB. Reformation Heritage Books has been one of the most pleasant experiences of my entire life, because books don't talk back to you like people do. People are just grateful they get books, and it's just such a joyous ministry, and God has blessed it to many, many people. So now we have about 100,000 customers, but I think a few years from now, these numbers are going up dramatically every year. And it's just a wonderful ministry.
How many books do you think that you've actually distributed? Any guesswork on that, or?
I don't know. It's whatever, probably $100 million worth would be. But it's been a lot of books. Yeah.
What was the first book you did?
The first book that we published was Robert Hawker's The Poor Man's Daily Portion, and we just reprinted it for the 5th time.
Did you?
Yeah, it's so Christ-centered as a daily devotional. Yeah, that was the first book.
I remember getting that, I think, with the first print.
Yeah. Ugly purple cover.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. So you've got 70 titles that RHB has produced. And then you have
40 titles a year we produce.
40 titles a year.
Yeah. So we've done maybe, I don't know, close to 1,000 titles ourselves.
Titles. All right.
But and of course these get the primary advertising.
Sure.
And then on the side we have these other 7,000 plus books that we carry from these 70 publishers, and they get little spots in our catalogs, and we advertise them. We send out 2 email blasts a week now to about 100,000 customers, and those do very, very well.
Yeah.
And then we've gone down to just 1 or 2 catalogs a year, because to do a catalog and send it out, it's like $30,000, $40,000 a shot with all the postage and all the printing. And we find that if we can just get people's emails, and we just put maybe 6 to 8 titles up on each email blast, and always include the first entry is always a new title, most of them that we do, and then we do related titles underneath it from other publishers, and that seems to work really well.
Yeah, I'm on your email list. I'm always glad to get them and see that, and we'll link to that too so people can sign up when they go to the notes of this show. One of the first things I did, and one of the best things I did when I became pastor of this church here in Cape Coral, was to start a book stall. and just bought books out of my own pocket to make available to our people.
Great.
And it was just a helpful thing. And I know churches today, every once in a while we'll get calls from pastors saying, how do we start a book stall or a book room or something? Do y'all have anything that you help churches do that?
Yes. Well, we help them with prices. So what we say is, on your first order, we will give you wholesale prices to get you going. And we're really dedicated to doing that because that's a big part of my past. And so, I love it when we get a new order from a church of $3,000-$4,000 worth, and they're starting a library and they get half off. It's great. It's really great.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful thing. If you haven't done that, or your church doesn't have a library or a book room where people can buy books, it was one of the most helpful things early in the years here to have books that I had vetted, that people could say, okay, well, the pastor trusts these books, and you just get books that are helpful to them, and they learn to read, and they learn to trust you and your recommendations, and it just feeds on itself.
Yeah, so what I did in my church, Tom, was I did two things. I got the elders to agree to put bookcases all over the church, and people can take the book. We put an envelope in it of what we expect, what they need to pay for the book. We call it suggested donation price. They take it home with them, and then they just send it in during the week. And most people send it in. A few people maybe help themselves to a free book, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And the bookcases are all over the church, so you can't miss it even if you're a visitor, which is great. And then the second thing I did from get-go was when I came to the church 36 years ago, they were not a reading church at all, and maybe a handful of individuals out of 1,000 people were reading. And so I talked to the elders, and they agreed that when I taught a midweek class, and then at that time we had 300 people coming to that class, I could offer every 6 weeks a book that I would strongly recommend, and then the church would buy that number from the publisher or from the denominational effort. And so the first thing I did was I started with J.C. Rile's 7 volumes on expository thoughts on the Gospels. And I'll never forget the first night I did that. I had a clipboard, and 155 families signed up for that set.
Wow.
And, that's quite an investment. But I picked Rile particularly because he's so simple and yet so edifying. And I thought if I could get them reading, it was always a gateway to family worship as well. They'd read 7 or 8 verses, and then they could read 1 or 2 thoughts a night. Maybe one passage is like 6 pages. Maybe take 2 nights and read it together aloud as a family. And that did so much in the congregation. Wherever I would visit, people would have that book open. I could see it, and they would talk to me about it. And then we just went every 6 weeks. We offered one more book, and always more than 100 people signed up for it. And so I helped the people build their library, their own personal libraries this way.
Yeah, that's wonderful. One thing that we have done here is periodically on Wednesday night or in our members' meetings, we'll give away a couple of books. And so we'll just ask people to maybe answer questions, or if they know anything about the author or the subject, give them away. And sometimes we'll give away 2 or 3 and say, you take this, but you get 2 or 3 people to read it with you, so that you have a little group together, and it just gets people reading, and they're communicating with each other. It's been a wonderful discipleship tool.
That's right. That's good. Yeah, and one more thing we do too along those lines is we have one giveaway book, which I pick out per year to the whole congregation. And then we encourage the people to talk about it together. Now this year, for example, we did Hawker, and in that book that we published first, we reprinted it. And what we did with that book was something different. We were putting a little clip from Hawker in every bulletin every week, and we're asking people to read every day, to read the same portion, so they can talk about it when they're at church, and try to promote more spiritual conversation.
Yeah.
And it's hard to say how many people are doing that, but we're trying to encourage people to read the same things and then fellowship about it.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Well, Reformation Heritage Books has certainly been impactful on my life and this congregation, and that's true of people around the world. And we're grateful that the Lord gave you a vision for that and a determination to pursue it. And look at the fruit, and who knows?
Yeah, now we're getting into documentaries as well to help as on-ramps, like the Puritan documentary to help people getting, and we're doing one right now, a movie on revivals. That will be coming out shortly. And that will hopefully get people to read those great men who were in the midst of revival and things like that.
Oh, that's a great idea. Well, Joel, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate all you're doing in your ministry and appreciate your fellowship and friendship too. Thanks for joining us on the Sword and the Trowel. We especially want to thank our Founders Alliance members that support us monthly to enable us to continue to produce content like this. If you'd like to know more about Founders, just go to founders.org, or you can contact us directly through that website by sending us an email. We'll be glad to try to answer any questions that you have. Thanks again for joining us.